Hey guys, Coach here. Welcome to this week's program. This week is going to be part 2 of DIY irrigation install. Last week we talked about a lot of lawn-based irrigation application and installation. This week we are shifting gears and going away from the lawn and out into the planting beds that need to be watered at various locations around the world. Now there's a couple of ways that you can approach planter beds. We are going to talk about the old standard pop-up spray heads, which are really getting kind of antiquated as far as efficiency, especially depending on what plants are used. The standard 4-inch pop-up spray after a mature foundation bed or planting beds is generally spraying right into a particular shrub and not penetrating the whole bed behind it. The gold standard now is drip irrigation, and that's going to be a bulk of this week's topic. But let's wrap up as far as pop-up spray heads in planter beds. The most efficient way that I have seen the approach on these things and that I have installed many times is to make sure you have very low plant material in the front of the beds that are going to be irrigated. I used to use 6-inch minimum pop-up heads, sometimes even 12-inch pop-up heads in order to properly irrigate a planting bed. Do I think it's the most efficient way of doing it? No, I don't. Are they still out there? Absolutely they are. If you have plants that are mixed with ground covers and stuff like that, your pop-up spray system still does an adequate job. It does. The other thing I would caution you on though is if you're in a place that has really hard water, a lot of calcium carbonate in your water, you will find as you water month after month, year after year, your plant material will start getting covered in it, and you'll get that crusty whitish gray look on the leaf material. So pop-up spray heads and that kind of a system in a planting bed is approached the same way as your lawn system. You're going to go out and you're going to flag the planting bed. You can have spray heads that are in the back of the bed shooting forward and in the front of the bed shooting backwards so that you have an overlap of coverage. There's that term again, overlap, and a much more consistent watering system rather than just everything goes right at the front of the bed. You're going to space them out with flags, just like you did your lawn area. You're going to determine, based on the number of flags that you've put in this bed, how many valves are going to be needed to service this planter bed and the rest of the foundation beds, whatever you're going to have. And then you're going to do your install, just like you did in your lawn area. And then you're going to bury everything, you're going to compact it down, you're going to test it, and then go ahead and complete your planting. Or, if you're doing an existing lawn, repair the plants, the roots, and everything else, tuck it down in there in the trench, and then remulch or do whatever you're going to do to make it look nice again. So I'm glazing over that only because there's not a lot of difference. It's just what you're watering and how tall that you're shooting the water into your planting beds. The other way that I'll leave you with on this part of it is oftentimes people use those gray Schedule 80 risers up out of the ground, and then you have just a spray shrub head on the top. And then you can adjust the elevation of these spray heads to whatever you need to shoot over or in the planting bed. The biggest problem with those is they generally tend to break. Dogs hit them, kids hit them, even when you're raking stuff out in the fall, when you're mulching with wheelbarrows, sometimes that Schedule 80 after a few years gets kind of brittle. But it's easily replaced, it's easily extracted and repaired, so that's just one more option. Okay, so let's talk about the kind of the gold standard in this day and age as far as watering planter beds. Planter beds that have ground covers, shrubs, trees, color, perennials, all that kind of stuff. That's the drip irrigation in this day and age. Why? Because everybody is so water conservation conscious and efficiency conscious. It works so much better to put a small amount of water right at the root base of a plant and allow it to drip over the course of several minutes, if not hours, rather than spray into the air and have probably 70% evaporation take place. You're putting the water right where it needs to be and not out into the atmosphere. So nowadays, I can't think of the last spray shrub bed system, probably 20 years, maybe 15 years since I did that. Everything else has been drip irrigated. And drip irrigation, the efficiency quotient that comes along with that, and the water cost savings that comes along with that, and the cost comparison that comes along with that, it's almost a duh moment. You just kind of need to go with drip irrigation. It's the way to go. So what are some of the precautions that you have to use when you get into drip irrigation? You can still have them on the same valve assembly. You can still have them come on at the same time if necessary. But oftentimes, really efficient watering kind of cuts down on the amount of days of the week that you actually need to water. You know, cities, municipalities, counties, all the regulatory authorities that govern our city-based water systems, they love drip irrigators because you're not wasting a lot of water. As a matter of fact, there's actually rules in place in some jurisdictions where if you have nothing but, you know, drip irrigation and you have no lawn, then you're good to go whenever you need to do it. They generally don't hinder people that drip irrigate rather than spray irrigate. And you can always tell. Usually drip irrigated landscapes don't have lawns, and you can never tell really when they're being watered. On one exception, maybe you have some micro sprays on stakes that are watering a particular color bed or a small area of ground cover or something. And that's the best way people know that, hey, the Smiths are watering again. Drip irrigation is approached in a slightly different manner than spray irrigation compared to your lawn and that kind of stuff. PSI, although very favorable in your spray systems, becomes almost a detriment when it comes to your drip irrigation. We don't want high pressures. It's just going to blow parts and pieces all over the place and cause a lot of damage. We use devices in those drip irrigation systems that bring the water pressure down. And when I'm saying down, maybe at the top, 30 PSI. Most of the time, 25 PSI is all you need. The plumbing systems that go along with this are usually always flexible polyethylene pipe. And if you're installing your own system and it's still cold out or it's getting cold out, strongly urge you to get your rolls of your polyethylene drip tubing home a few days in advance. Have some help and uncoil them and let them relax out in the sunshine. I used to put them along fence lines and up on the tops of the top rail of a fence line, and I'd tack them down and I'd run a few hundred feet of those back and forth and just let them sit there for a couple of days. Then when you go to install them, remember most of them are going to be either on the surface or just slightly below the surface of the ground. Now there's a couple different kinds of drip irrigation. There's the emitter type of drip irrigation where you have a supply line, then you have an emitter line, and then you have the emitters. The emitters, the actual water delivering device that's putting water out of the system and onto the ground next to the plant. The flexible 1/4-inch tubing that goes on the emitter connects to your supply line. Your supply line is what goes back to your valve assembly. And their connection points can be done in a couple of ways. You can do a remote location, which I did quite a bit. If I put in a valve assembly and I had a PVC system and 2 of the valves that were dedicated in that valve assembly were going to be for planter beds, I would use the same trenches I did for the lawn and run them out to the fence line or run them over to a foundation bed, and I would stub them up right at ground level with a drip tubing adapter inserted in the elbow at the top. And then I would just tape that off and do my other stuff until I was ready to finish with my drip tubing. And then I would take the tape off, put the drip tubing in, and then irrigate the beds. That's called remote application. You can also do it from the valve assembly itself and take it off right from there, but you're just using more polyethylene pipe instead of PVC pipe. The other thing about drip systems that you generally don't have to worry so much about spray systems, and that is filtration. Filtration is very, very important, and there are devices that come along in modern day drip irrigation systems that have both the pressure reducer and the filter all in one piece. They kind of look like this right here. So if you're doing a drip system, maybe you have 4 valves that are serving your lawn, and you have a couple of valves that are serving your foundation around the front of your house and your planter beds out in the front yard. You can put on the anti-siphon valve, you can put that pressure reducer filter device right on the downstream part of your valve. Or if you're doing remote, you can put that device right in a valve box, right with your elbowed PVC pipe. You can put it right on there and then run your polyethylene pipe from that point on in the remote application. So what are the differences again? We're talking about less PSI, and we're talking about filtration for a successful drip irrigation system. Now the parts and pieces that go along with this is basically, they're just a little different than spray. We talked about the supply line, and the supply line is the larger 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 inch polyethylene pipe. And that's supplying the water throughout the bed to the end point. Then we're going to poke holes in that supply line along its route and then put in various 1/4 inch tubing couplers, and then putting the emitter right at the base of your new plant, maybe on a little emitter stake so it's up above out of the ground, it doesn't get clogged. And then we're talking about staking the supply line down to the ground. Again, you can leave it right on the surface and mulch over it with whatever mulch you choose to use, or gravel, whatever you choose to use. Or you can kind of do just a real mild 1 inch, maybe 2 inch deep little trench and put your supply line in that and stake it down and then cover it back over. Just kind of protects it a little bit from weather, stepping on it, rodents that like to chew on water stuff and plastic stuff. Just kind of protects it a little bit. Drip irrigation is a way of taking kind of an inefficient way of watering and making it very efficient. We're talking about the amount of water used in an hour now rather than in a minute. And your emitters are going to come in various sizes. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 gallons per hour per emitter. So you don't have to do a lot of math now. A single 1/2 inch supply line in the normal backyard is going to be able to supply a whole fence line. Absolutely a whole fence line. And you'll not see any difference between the first emitter and the last emitter, because we're using a microscopic amount of water compared to a spray head. 90% savings. For you in places that have high water bills, this is where you really want to get good. Get good at it and understand it. Okay, so that basically covers drip irrigation and how it compares to spray irrigation. Let's talk about some environmental factors that come to bear on both types of systems. Environmental factors will tend to make us think about when we're going to water and how we're going to water, and do we need to know prevailing winds and that kind of stuff, what type of devices we're actually going to deliver the water with. Maybe you're going to need more force, so maybe you might need bigger heads. And in that case, do we need bigger pipe? So no, environmental factors start off with, are you in a real arid area? Places that, depending on your plant choices, you're going to need to water more often. Maybe you're in a real humid area, and humid areas tend to have a lot of rain, so maybe you don't need to water quite as often. I talked about windy areas. There's places down in the southwest part of our country that we have traveled through that during the springtime, it's like a gale-forced winds almost 24 hours a day in the springtime. Trying to water with spray heads down there, it has to be done in the middle of the night when the wind is at its very, very least. Otherwise, you're just wasting water. You're not getting water onto the plant and certainly into the ground in a sufficient amount. So there's where plant choices and other things come into play. And where environmental factors, doesn't that sound custom made for drip irrigation? So you're not broadcasting this water out into a windy, arid environment. The other thing you need to know about, even before you start designing out your system, is what kind of soils you got. Do you have real sandy, very highly porous type of soil where water is going to go on there and it's going to go through that porous soil rather quickly? May have to bump up a few minutes there to make sure that your lawn and your plants get the right amount of water. Or do you have a heavy clay soil? If you throw a ½ inch of water on your clay lawn, in a matter of minutes, it's just running off. And maybe you need to back that water minutes back and water slightly more frequently so that the water hits and sinks in, and you get a much more efficient watering for your plants and lawn. The other thing is what about your plant and lawn varieties themselves? When you make your plant selection, know your USDA zones or wherever you live, and know what plants really work best together as well as what goes with the lawn as well. There are drought-tolerant lawns out there, dwarf fescue lawns and buffalo grass lawns and some of the Bermuda lawns. These guys can tolerate a few days, depending on the temperatures and the soils and everything else, a few days where you don't have to water them. You have to water them every day. You shouldn't have to water any landscape in a residential setting every single day. If you do, you're just going to create a very, very shallow root system that dries out in a hurry as soon as you turn that spigot off, or you have a problem with a timer or something. And then lastly, as far as environmental factors, is how much sun versus how much shade are the area that you're irrigating, and that will determine when you're going to water, how much you're going to water, and what kind of plants you're putting in there. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about timers. In this day and age, in 2024, I do not see why anybody would have a manual irrigation system. I just don't. Unless you're doing a big agricultural type of job, residential landscape irrigation, it just should be irrigated with an automatic timer. And why? Because it allows the flexibility of being able to turn on and turn off at just the precise times where your best water penetration and usage can be. You can time it so that your sprinkler system comes on if you're pressure challenged. It's not coming on during when showers and dishwashers and clothes washers are going and robbing more PSI for the house rather than for the irrigation system. The timer can do that for you. You can also do it as far as segregating various programs, so your lawn gets maybe 3 days a week, but your planter beds on that really efficient drip system only gets a day a week, maybe 2 days a week. And on your third drip system, maybe it does your mini orchard or your vegetable garden, and it's on a whole nother program. It takes a little bit of reading the manual, but man, if you have a 3-program system, you can have various parts and pieces of your greenscape watered just right. And why wouldn't you do that? For an investment of $100 and maybe some more dollars for wire to run out to your valves, it saves you money in the long run, it saves water for sure, and the efficiency quotient goes way, way up. So I'm a big proponent of timers. And nowadays, you can do it to where they can connect Bluetoothed right to your phone. If you're on vacation somewhere and you suddenly see that back home you got a heat wave that's starting tomorrow morning, you can Wi-Fi your timer right at your house to bump it up a couple of minutes so that it makes sure that your water gets done correctly. You can also have rain sensing devices put out there on the system so that if it starts to rain on your Wednesday watering day, all of a sudden you're getting a ½ inch of rain, it'll shut the system down. If you're doing it manually, you can't do that, plain and simple. So go with technology when it comes to irrigation and make sure you put in a timer. All right, hey, that's what I have. What I'm going to leave you with is just a little bit of nomenclature when it comes to this stuff, especially for drip systems, and only take about a minute of your time. Okay, remember I talked about supply line. supply line is the black polyethylene pipe that is going to be laid on the surface, and that generally comes in 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch, and it comes in 100-foot rolls, sometimes 50-foot rolls for small projects. So supply line. We have the devices that are pressure reducer and filters, very important for drip systems. Then we have connectors. Much like PVC pipe, there are pronged connectors that are poked into supply lines and put at the ends of emitter tubing, and basically these connect your parts and pieces. We talk about the water delivery devices themselves, the emitters. Emitters generally should go on what they call emitter stakes. They're little stakes that you put right next to the plant. They're little forked stakes that you can slide your emitter tubing right into with the emitter here, and it's just above all your mulch and everything so it doesn't get clogged. I think it's a complete and a professional way to do it. So emitter stakes are a big part of your parts and pieces list. And lastly, there's your ground stakes. Your ground stakes are going to be little U-pins, galvanized U-pins that you're going to pound into the ground to hold your supply line down to the ground and not let it get all wavy along the ground when things get warm. It's going to make it look a lot more professional. You're going to take that supply line and run it through that bed, however it is, so you can put emitters at every single plant that you need to do, and your supply line is going to be secured to the ground with those ground stakes. So there you go, chapter 2. Covered a little different stuff than we did last week. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link to it right up here. Check it out. And if you have any questions regarding a project you guys are doing, I would appreciate an email, or you can drop it in the comment below, whatever you want to do. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope I've earned a subscribe and certainly a thumbs up. Catch you guys next week. As always, to your landscape success, and I'll say goodbye for now.